Hi listeners, Harika here, and I'm super excited to welcome you to Upptalk. If you're ready to learn and get your hands work wonders in the world of information technology, then you're in the right place. When I say Upptalk, we are not just another edtech company. Consider we are your learning partner committed to unlocking your full potential. Whether you're stepping into the world of technology for the first time or looking to advance your career, we provide top-tier, hands-on courses to build up your career. Let's take our first step towards learning here and explore it. Let's investigate SAP, a well-known enterprise resource planning system, and discover its many functionalities and business applications.
Sorry for that. So we can always add the privilege that we want. So the privilege that it is asking me is that you need to have audit admin privilege with you. If you want to change any audit parameters with the best user ID, so I have ascended. So what I'm going to do a refresh before I try to do any changes here. And I'm going to close all the sessions that are open. I don't want them. But it is not always suggestible to give all the privileges under one rule. It will become an SAP all role or a wider access role. So always try to create roles which only the end user needs. Let us say, if you are creating a role for the security admin, you have to make sure that you are only assigning the privileges that the security admin might need. You should not be giving the security admin a privilege to create any modeling views in the catalog or something like that. So because we're not going to create any tables, or we are not going to create any views, the calculation views or analytical views like that. We are only going to create users and roles in the system. And we are responsible for maintaining all these things in the security tab. Let us say we have this tab here. You are responsible as a user and again logged into the system. Let me log in with the best user ID. Now I'll be able to use the status. Now I'm able to enable the audit log basically. So I'll be responsible as a security admin. We will be responsible for this security tab, this user tab, and role tab. That's it. I'm not going to touch anything else here. The provisioning or the content of the catalog or backup. These things are used by different users. Provisioning and content is mostly used by the basis team, not by us. We rarely use content. I'll show you like in which scenarios we are going to use content here. But backup, catalog, and provisioning, we never test them. This catalog is used by the modelers. The modelers are the developers. This backup is used by basis team. Provisioning is used by basis team. Only the two folders that we are going to utilize is the security folder and this content folder. I am only explaining you this catalog folder so that you will have an idea in future. Let us say if they're saying that some access is missing, you should be immediately able to say that which schema you might need. Tell me. I'll be able to add it to your profile or else what access issue you're getting. I'll switch on a trace and let me trace what access you're missing. There are different queries that we are going to use to raise the issues. Whenever a user gets an access issue, we'll be ready with this SQL query, which helps us out to give what privilege that user is missing. For that, what happens? So if for every error that we are going to get, actually I should have showed you earlier. So it showed me the privilege along with that privilege. It also showed me an error code. So using this error code, there is an SQL query in SAP which I'm going to show you in HANA DB. There is an SQL query. You can open the SQL editor and you can select. You can execute this command prompt. So you can execute this query along with the error code. So what happens? It will clearly give you what privilege that user is missing. In turn, you can analyze and you can assign this privilege to the user so that you can get the desired access. So that is how you should do. Also, you will not be assigning any privileges directly to the user. The privileges should always come from the role. It is the standard practice and it is the best practice which is recommended by SAP. You should never always assign this privilege to the user directly. You have to assign this access indirectly. How do you do it? You have to edit the role. You have to add the missing privilege to this role and you have to update the user ID with this access. So what happens? Basically, the privilege will be there in the role once the user ID is refreshed. Automatically, that privilege will be updated in the privilege section. You will not touch privilege section. I have only added it for your knowledge purpose here, showing you that if some privilege is missing, I can add the system privilege. But it is always not recommended to add the system privilege. So whenever you create a custom role, you will be adding all the necessary privileges into the role itself. So what happens once you add this role to this user? Once you assign this role to the user and save it automatically, whatever system privileges are assigned to that role are reflected here in the system privilege. So let us say if this privilege is missing to a particular user, you should add it to a role and you have to save it. That's it. That privilege will automatically be updated here in the system privilege. Am I clear so far? The role is basically nothing but a set of privileges. It's a collection of privileges. Thank you. So you are only assigning a role to the user. So we'll be basically responsible for doing this audit to maintain this password policy. And do you guys have any idea on the SAML? SAML is nothing but it is an SC solution, single sign-on solution. What is a single sign-on? Single sign-on basically enables you to log in into the system without the need of a user, ID, and password. Let us say if your organization is implementing a single sign-on solution. So what happens if you have any configuration ready, you can add it simply. These details are provided by the basis team. So you're going to give the identity provider name. And once you give the identity provider name, if the configuration is ready in the system, it will automatically pick it up. So that's how you add a SAML. But trust me, no one does it. In HANA, people never activate this SML or Kerberos or X559. These are all different kinds of SNC solution guys in the market. So you have all these solutions in HANA-DB. If you want to configure something based on your client's requirement, you can always configure it with the help of the basis team. So basis guy, what he does is that it basically provides you with the identity provider name, or he himself maintains his SAML identity provider tab. We don't do it. And coming to data volume encryption, if you want to get some. So these are all the services, the standard services that are provided by HANA-DB by default. If you want to encrypt something, if you want to make sure that you're not able. So let us double click on this. Nothing is happening. But if you want to encrypt some service, you can do it from here. Let us say if you select something and if you want to encrypt it, You can do it, but it is not recommended to change any of these settings. Always you should have it unencrypted. So this is data volume encryption. But basically what you're going to do is, as a security admin, you're going to touch only audit and password policy in the real time. You're not going to touch anything else. Auditing so that you will have the trail of everything, so that who does what in the system. But by default you'll have, this is log enabled. Let me select this. I'll show you how you can. General. So this is a tenant database. I'm sorry, the system log. It's not going to allow me anything. So this configuration is on the same. I'll check on this. Let us continue. No, it's not allowing us to change any setting when it comes to audit. I'll check with our back, and this thing, it should usually allow us to enable this setting, but it is not. We have to enable. We can add any policy that we want. We can enforce any policy that we want, but this is a different session. Going forward, we are going to cover this audit session in auditing. So at that time, we can have this ready. For now, we have covered all the 4 folders that we get basically in your system. So this is a structure. This is a common structure that you get to look at. Whatever system you add on with whatever system, whatever user ID you will log in, this is the basic structure that you are going to get. So let me show you what kind of users we have in the system. So the beginning of the session, you might have saw. So this screenshot here. So there are 2 types of users in HANA DP. As you can see, system users and the application users. The system users are the user IDs which come by default at the time of installation. So once you install HANA DB, so what happens? These user IDs are automatically generated, and each system user ID is responsible for different tasks. Just like the system user ID which you are using now. So you are using system user ID. Earlier, we are using system user ID. So what system user ID enabled us with is that it enabled us to use the system as we like. There is no restriction for our system user ID, but in this training server, they have restricted it. I don't know for some reason, but usually what happens by default, it will not. There will be no restriction. You can create any user IDs you want. You can create any views you want. You can do whatever you like in the system, so it is always advisable. So once you are able to create the custom roles and custom user IDs, you should always log in with that user ID, and you should disable this user ID so that no one else uses this user ID. That is the thing. But basically people never follow these instructions from SAP. They keep on using the system user ID, but it is not advisable. It is up to the company requirement. Once again, it is up to them. So these are the different system user IDs that you can see. _sys, _sys repo, _sys, _task, and each system user ID is responsible for some activities. I'll show you that. What activities it does. And coming to application user ID, we are application users. We are the application users. That is administrators, modelers, and developers and end users, because we are going to use the application and these user IDs doesn't come by default. You have to create these user IDs. Then how do you create these user IDs? There are two ways of creating a user ID in HANA DB. One way is to create it by just clicking on security. So not security. Just expand the security tab. Just select on users. Click on click and select new user. There are two kinds of users here. There's a new user and restricted user. So Nelly asked me like what happens if a third-party application is connected or third-party application is built using HANA database. And so for such instances, what happens? Those users will not log into HANA DB directly. They'll be using the HANA DB resources from the application itself. So for that, for the search users, we are going to create new restricted user. I'll tell you a simple difference between a new user and a new restricted user. It's going to be very easy. So when I select on create user and when I select new user, what happens? It will ask me to create a username. So I'm going to do a random username here. Let us call it app username. App username. So this option is the only thing that differentiates between a new user and a new restricted user. If I'm going to select it, see what happens. If I'm going to select it and save it, this user is nothing but a restricted user. Let me show you the difference. It is not coming. This box is not checked by default for a new user. If I am going to select a new restricted user here, see what happens. Are you able to see? The disabled box is already checked. So they'll be not able to log in into the system using user ID and password HANA DB system. They'll not be able to log in directly. So they'll not be able to access ODBC or JDBC access basically. If you create them, if you create these user IDs as restricted users, if you create a user as a normal user, as an internal HANA database user, that user will be able to do anything, any activity in the system. That is how you do it. You can give some random password as I've removed everything. Now you'll be able to give any password of your choice. But 8 characters is not removed by me, so for that reason I have to give the password here. But if not, you can do the random password you want. I'll just use a password called login. And as I said to you earlier, these are all the solutions. These are all single sign-on solutions, SNC solutions basically. So what it does? Basically, if you have something configured for your company, what you can do, you can simply select this and you can configure this. Since you don't have any configuration, it will not allow you to do it. So each and everything has a different thing actually. When it comes to SML is what? SML is a security accession markup language, if you might know. It's an SNC solution. So what happens if you are trying to use HANA DB from an Android application or an iOS application? So usually this SML comes into picture. Windows also, you can use it from HANA DB. From any third-party application, if you want to use it directly without any user ID or password, you can go with SML. When it comes to this X509, if you're able to see, so we can use this as a web portal for web portals and applications, and where you can use digital signature and thumbprint. In some organizations, you might see like people we employ in a few projects. I've seen that because I myself used to log in with a thumb impression. So they have this configured in their organization. So until and unless you have this thumb impression registered there, you will not be able to log into the system. So X509 allows you to do that, to take digital signatures and thumbprints. So these are all different technologies basically. And Kerberos is your famous Windows A, D, or the Active Directory that you might have. You can give this as a Kerberos, and you can give the external ID. The external ID can be anything. Mostly, it will be your mail ID, which is created in the Active Directory. You can give the active, you can maintain the Active Directory here, and the user will be able to log in directly without the user ID and password. It depends organization to organization. So basically these tabs does that. It enables C. If you have it implemented, you can configure this. And this configuration is also done by the base system mostly. But in some cases, in some projects, they might ask you if the base system is completely occupied. They might ask you to configure this. But still the metadata or the pre-delivered data for this configuration is provided to you so that you can configure this. We have all the steps with you to configure this. I don't know which technology, like you might have AD already in your Golf helicopters by now. Similarly, you have some technology registered for SNC. So as I said, LDAP is it. So Kerberos is your LDAP basically. You can enable Kerberos if you want. But for HANA DB, we never do it because anyways it will always have the limited users in it. Like the Beaver, users are very limited in my previous projects at least. It might be a different scenario for you, but usually it is very less that people might use this ANN database directly. And so you can. This is the classic scenario where you set the validity date from date and to date. And the session client, you never give any session client. And as I said, you have to, while creating a new user, you have to give some roles. So what roles do we have? Now we only have the system roles. Somebody has created admin ABAP roles here, but let us not go with these roles. But we do have all standard roles here. So someone has created a table admin, some other user has created some table real distribution role, then select it. You can see what system privileges are added to it. Nothing is there. What privileges this user has added into this role? Nothing. It's a dummy role basically. So it's not giving you with any privilege. But let us say if you're adding a good role with the amount of privileges, you will be able to see the privileges here. Let us save it and see if we are getting any privileges or not. What happened? So validate. So it is clearly showing you that valid until cannot be of the past date, basically. Let's give it static first so it is not showing us. Nothing. It will allow us to see it now. So happy user ID is created. So see what privileges. So whenever you create a user, this public role is automatically created. This is a standard role which is created by the system itself. And it is granted by what? You can see which user ID granted this. We did not grant this. Who is the responsible user? ID which granted this. So this granted is a very good topic, guys, which we are going to cover in our coming sessions. So this is user ID is responsible for granting this public role. So why? By giving this public role, what happens? This public role will basically give you access to all the system use. You will be able to only view the views which are there in the system. That basic standard access is given by this user ID, which is your standard user ID. And there are, as I said to you earlier, in this screenshot you were able to see the different kind of system, user IDs, and different kinds of tasks that it is going to perform. Let us say now you have seen this user ID. What is it doing? It is assigning a public user whenever you create public role. Similarly, season repo is responsible for one task. Season repo is the owner for all the objects that you are going to create because it is going to store all these objects in a repository. So why is it necessary to store all the objects in the repository? Let us say if Emmanuel has left the company, he has all these objects created with this under his own schema. If let us say, as per the levers policy, if I'm going to delete the user, what is going to happen? All the schema that is created by, let us say, Emmanuel is lost. For that reason, to prevent that, what SAP has done is that there is a system, user ID, imbued in HANA DB, which does this activity. It stores everything into the repository. Whatever object you create, whatever calculation view you create, whatever attribute you are going to create, it is going to add all these objects or all this data into a repository and it is going to save it as a backup by default. You will have it even if an employee leaves the company. Also, it does not matter to SAP, basically, it will have everything sorted. So that is how you got this public role by default. And you are not able to see any privileges. And you are only able to see one privilege, that is object privilege, because this is also a privilege which is created by default by the system. User ID. It is created by default. This is what this is, a schema which is created automatically. If you log in with Happy User ID, you will be only able to see one schema under your catalog along with the system schemas. You will have these system schemas under your ID, but only you will be able to view the data in it. You will not be able to change any data by default because you will only be able to view this data because of this public role which is allotted to you automatically. It is allocated to you automatically by the system, user ID. That is that. What I also explained to you about the restricted user. So this slide clearly explains for you, for every person who needs to work with SAP HANA, the administrator creates a database user. User admin is nothing but the security person like us. We are going to create the standard users or the restricted users. So, as you can already see, by default they can create objects in their own schema. So by default, the standard schema is created with their own name. They can create whatever system use they want and they can get read access to system use, which is granted by this public role automatically, which is granted to every standard user. Restricted user is also a similar thing. We are not going to assign any system privileges or object privileges, schema privileges to this restricted user because he is not going to log in into HANA-DB directly. What is he going to do? He is going to basically log in with the application itself. He is going to log in from application itself. So for such users, there is a different access that we are going to give. That is nothing but your application privileges. I'm going to show you that in the further sessions. What application privileges are we going to grant? We will have all the standard SAP application privileges here, but we are not going to grant this. So I'll show you how we create a role with application privileges. When you grant this role, these application privileges are automatically reflected, so that this user can access HANA-DB from his application itself. He will not be logging into the system directly, And also remember, guys, you will not be able to log in with this system user IDs like you have here. So I showed you the system user IDs in the earlier slide. Underscore system repo underscore system. The only system user ID that you will be able to log in is with the ID called system. That's it. You will be able to log in only with this ID. All other IDs are internal database user IDs. All these user IDs are internal standard database user IDs, and login is not possible with these user IDs. Why do you have these user IDs in place? So that each and every ID has a specific task assigned to it. I have also, let us not go here. I'll show you what. I will show you that. So in these two slides, I have given you the data, like what user ID does, what system ID, what it does, SID ADMEM, what it does. SID is nothing but your system ID, guys. It varies between organization to organization. Here, what is your system ID? This is TP. Here, what is your system ID? It is STB. So in your organization, it might vary. Is that basically? SID is your system ID. Let us say it would be STB DMEM user in our environment. Let's see. STB DMEM would be your standard user ID that you get. See if it is there. It should be there. Not there. But usually it is there. This is a standard user ID that has to be there. The system, and there is a responsibility for it, which I'm going to explain what it is going to do. And this is user ID. Now you have seen this user ID has assigned a public role, and also it has created a schema of your name by default. All these users, except this one. This is an operating system user. You will not have it in the user section. This user ID is used while you are going to do the setup and all. Installation is done by this user ID. And this ID user ID is provided by SAP so that you can perform the installation. If you procure this license, you are going to get this user ID from SAP. This user ID is your operating system user ID, and this allows you to install the application. While installing this application or the configuration of this application, you are going to use this ID. So this is operating system user, and this is the database user which you get by default at the time of installation. It will have access to everything in the system, be it tables or the database users or anything in the system. You are going to get it with the system user ID. Please do like, share and subscribe to our channel. For more information, contact us sales@uptalk.com.